G'day, you mob. How's it going? Welcome to this episode of Pete's 2 Cents on the Aussie English podcast. I'm your host, Pete, obviously. And today I'm going to answer some of your questions from Instagram. Before we get started, a bit of housekeeping. Remember, if you want to ask questions, just jump on Instagram on Mondays generally, and I put up a story with an Ask Me Anything question box, and you can insert all of your questions there. You can also send me a message if it's a bit longer than you can fit into the box. But yeah, I love getting your questions there. And then secondly, remember, if you want to get access to the transcripts for the podcast episodes that come with transcripts, to the premium podcast player, to the bonus episodes, everything like that, go and check out the premium podcast membership at aussieenglish.com.au/podcast. Okay, so let's get into it. The first question here comes from Javeria Khan 06. Okay. What is your favorite food to have on occasion? Okay, so on occasion, I imagine you mean this like from time to time, sometimes, right? My favorite food. I think, there's food, and that could be anything. And then there's a meal, right? Which would be, say, a plate of food that you get at a restaurant or takeaway food. If we're talking about just like food in general, I think treats-wise, salt and vinegar chips are probably my weak spot. I absolutely love salt and vinegar chips. And the Kettles brand, there's a brand in Australia called Kettles. It's a pink or purpley kind of color on the packet. And it's probably the strongest vinegary one that I've been able to find. I really like them to burn your mouth. I've always been into foods that are kind of a bit spicy, and vinegar, at least in salt and vinegar chips, they seem to burn your mouth a little bit. So yeah, it's funny. I can't really handle other types of chips, other flavors, right? Chicken, sea salt, all those sorts. I can have one or two, but when it comes to salt and vinegar, I can eat an entire packet all by myself. So there's those. Meal-wise, I'm a massive fan of Thai food. I absolutely love Thai takeaway food. So, give me some fried rice with a green chicken curry and then maybe some of the roti bread, and I'm in heaven. So, yeah, but there's loads of different foods that I like, but there's some of the main ones. All right. How do you pronounce the word rhythm? This comes from Sipkun Kazuhira. Sorry, some of these Instagram names are very long, and I'm not sure if they're multiple words or not. So how do you pronounce rhythm? The word rhythm, right? Like if you play the drums, you need to have good rhythm. So the first syllable is ri, just an R sound, and that short I sound, like in the word it, right? Ri. And then the second syllable, it looks confusing because the spelling is RHYTHM. And I think rhythm is one of these words that technically has no vowels in the spelling. There's obviously vowels in the pronunciation, but in the spelling, if you don't count Y as a vowel, then there's technically no vowels in it. So the second syllable, THM, is pronounced them, right? A voiced TH, th, and then a schwa vowel sound, and an M consonant sound, So them. So together, you say the word rhythm. Rhythm. And where's the stress? If I say rhythm, it's on the first syllable. Rhythm, hence the schwa. So that's how you pronounce it. It's one of these words in English. It's not that hard to pronounce. It's just that the spelling is so strange that I think people, when they were to, are to read the word, they think, what? So yeah, rhythm. Hopefully that's easier. This one comes from evg.k. Fairer or further / farther? Thanks heaps. Okay, so I imagine... Oh, okay, so fairer, you mean like farer. No, so you're asking about how do we say that something is more far, right? And we wouldn't say more far, you wouldn't say farer either. We would say the word further. You could say farther, like it's farther away, but to me, in my pronunciation, it sounds strange to pronounce it that way because it sounds like the word father is in like mother and father, right? Your parent. So I think I would typically say further. So how far away is it? Is it at Geelong? No, it's further away. It's much further. It's up near Melbourne, right? It's further away, further. It'll be interesting to ask Americans how they do this because father and father, the way that I pronounce them, so like your father is farther away, there's no difference in pronunciation, father and father. Whereas when an American were to say father as in it's further, I think they would pronounce that R obviously, and so it might sound like farther instead of father, right? So there'd be actually a difference in how they pronounce those two words. It's kind of like, I'm trying to think of the other one. Can and can't. If we say can and can't in Australian English, we use a different vowel, right? I can do that. No, I can't do that. And we can mute the T so that they're actually almost the same pronunciation, but for the vowel, right? I can, I can't. I can, I can't. Whereas Americans will say the same vowel sound, can and can't. And they almost have to say that T so that you know which is happening here. So that's almost in reverse, I guess, the difference in pronunciation there. Like the Australians say the words differently, but the Americans say it with the same vowel sound. All right, next question. Ishi. Okay. Middles, schooners, tinnies. How many ways can you say beer or the beer? So there's loads of different ways. The first two words you used here, I think middles and schooners, these are different sizes of drinks that you would order at a pub or a venue that's selling beer on tap, right? So if you're buying a glass of beer, usually there's going to be multiple sizes, at least two. In Victoria, it's pot. A pot would be, I think, 285 milliliters, so it's a bit smaller than a can of say, soft drink. And a pint would be, is it 518 milliliters? I think it's about that. So yeah, it's probably about twice a pot. They're the two sizes we would use in Victoria, but it changes from state to state. So I remember when we were doing a road trip up to Queensland, as you travel through New South Wales, you start realizing they call pots, I think they call them schooners, and pints, or they may do it the other way around where they say midi for a pot and schooners kind of the large version of a beer, but it's not as big as a pint. It gets weird. I don't know why that's the case. You know, it probably dates back to like when we first colonized Australia, and the sizes that they would have used in different colonies would have been different, and it just never got standardized across the entire country. The other thing that you'll notice change, phrases like if you go get fish and chips in Victoria and you ask for a potato cake, they're going to give you a circular deep fried piece of potato, right? It's kind of like a little frisbee, but it's made out of potato. It's like a large chip in the shape of a circle. But if you go to, I think it's definitely New South Wales. I think it's Queensland too. They'll say potato scallop, right? Like a scallop is a type of shellfish with a really flat, almost circular shell. You know, if you go to the petrol station Shell, you'll know what the shell looks like. That symbol, that's a scallop shell. And so they'll call them, potato scallops for obvious reasons. But if you say that down here, I mean, we'd probably know. Like, I think if you went to most fish and chip shops and said that, they'd be like, you mean potato cakes? But yes, I know what you mean. But I remember being a kid and walking into a fish and chip shop and being like, oh my God, they don't have potato cakes. And then being like, what the hell is a potato scallop? Is that like a scallop deep fried with potato around it? Like, what? So yeah. But then there's other ways. So there's loads of slang related to drinking. It's probably the same in every language, but we can say things like tinny to mean a can of beer, right? Because it used to be made of tin. They were called tinnies. So I might go to the shops, might go to the bottle-o, right? The bottle shop. Go to the bottle-o and buy a few tinnies. But we can say stubbies for bottles of beer. Quite often the stubby ones, right? The short, fat bottles. A long neck is like 750 mils worth of beer, right? It's the very large bottles that you can get, usually of brands like VB and 4X and all that, really big ones. That's a long neck. What else? Stubby, slab. Okay, so a slab would be multiple six-packs. I think usually between 24 and 30. By bottles, right? So 4 and 5 6-packs. A 6-pack is obviously a pack of 6. You can get a 4-pack as well. That's becoming more and more common. I don't know if that's like shrinkflation, where companies keep the prices the same, but they just take out volume. So, you can get 4 cans, Tinnies, Stubbies, whatever, for the price of 6. But 4-packs seem to be quite common now. And then sometimes we call it the amber fluid. If you want to be a little poetic, you can be like, oh, I'm going to go have some amber fluid. You can call it piss. I'm going to go sing some piss with some mates. But that can be any alcohol, right? Any alcoholic drink. Could be wine, whiskey, vodka, mixed drinks. It could be anything. That's piss, right? We're using the slang term there for urine, piss. Obviously, that is very informal, and you would probably not use that around, I don't know, around people you were trying to be formal around, your parents, your grandparents, I don't know. So yeah, and then off the top of my head, I'm trying to think. I'm sure there's others, but I can't really think of any. So yeah, what do we got? Tinnies, Stubbies, Longneck, 4-pack, 6-pack, slab, and then all the different sizes, and then amber fluid. That refers to beer. Okay, let's keep going. So, let me just... Sorry, I keep fiddling with my phone here and thinking... I've screenshotted all of the comments, and I keep thinking that I'm actually in Instagram. Okay. How can we find Aussie friends to have conversations with? So I seem to get this question a lot, and I think, it's obviously something that a lot of you guys are experiencing, the difficulty at finding friends in Australia. And I just want to say, I guess, before we get into it, you're not alone, and it's the same for me. I find it inherently difficult, incredibly difficult finding and making friends at an older age. I feel like it's one of those things, once you're outside of university or high school, it's so much harder to kind of make good friends that you can really, that become like best friend kind of people. Because I think everyone tends to sort of get into their routine. They get into their, I don't know, they have their friends from when they were young. They have their, acquaintances and everything from work. And that's about it. And people don't put in a lot of effort to try and make new friends. So it's something that I'm aware of the older I get. And it's something that I'm trying to help counter, in that I'm trying to help change it by putting myself out there and making myself available to other people to become their friends at an older age. Because I've even noticed it with my friends from high school. So many of them, it was like as soon as they had kids, they just stopped nurturing any kind of friendships that they had, at least to the same degree. They might, send you a message once every few months or something, even if they live nearby. But it's so much harder maintaining friendships, I reckon, as an adult compared to when I was a kid. So yeah, so when I was answering this question on Instagram, I think my answer was effectively think about hobbies and interests and passions that you have outside of, work and family, and find a way to do them while socializing, whether that's joining a club or going to a gym or going to a location where other people are doing that thing, whether it's free or not, right? Like if you go to the beach and you see people playing a sport or something down at the beach and they keep showing up on the same, at the same place on the same day on a regular basis, you try and start a conversation with them. And then it's that kind of thing where if you can show people that you share a similar interest, quite often you'll be invited to kind of partake in that with them. And then that's how you kind of develop those friendships. It's so funny. It's one of those things, I notice it with my kids all the time, where if we go to a park, they'll end up playing with the other kids because, they're all doing things that they're all interested in. If my son has a ball and he's kicking it around, the other kids that show up are obviously going to be interested in kicking a ball around. But I think as adults, we quite often want to almost give people space and feel like we shouldn't be interacting with them or interrupting them or whatever. But for me, it's the kind of thing where if I'm doing something out and about, and like if I'm doing bird photography, that I used to be into, I used to get stopped every now and then by people who were obviously interested in photography or interested in birds. And I absolutely loved being able to have a conversation about the stuff that I was doing or taking photos of or whatever. And then, quite often you keep seeing the people in the same place. You might try and then organize to meet up in the same place, and then, hey, let's go out together sometime, let's catch up and do some photography together. So a big part of it is just putting yourself out there and trying to take advantage of those situations. My wife has one of her best friends. She met in Canberra, and the situation, we probably talked about it on the podcast. The situation was sort of similar. She was just doing some photography one evening while we were going for a walk. We were walking up a hill. She was taking some photos of the sunset, and there was another woman with her husband walking around, about the same age as us, walking their dog, but she was also taking photos. And we just struck up a convo with them, a conversation, and realized they live nearby, and exchanged numbers, and we're like, oh, we should catch up sometime and do some more photography. You guys seem like, a cool couple, really interesting and fun to chat to. And that's how they ended up, becoming friends. And one of them, I think it would have been the wife, asked us over for dinner, and then we asked them over for dinner, and it just kept going back and forth. So you have to kind of find ways of meeting people through an interest or a passion, I think. That's how friendships tend to develop, right? You're not going to meet someone in the street and just spontaneously become friends with them despite having no common interests. Typically, it's you share some kind of interest and strike a chord with that person, have an interesting conversation about that thing. Even if you are on a bus and you randomly talk to someone and they're like, man, did you see Game of Thrones on the weekend? And then you're like, oh my God, I love Game of Thrones. Yes, I saw it. What the hell was Sansa thing? That's how friendships happen. So a big thing is just putting yourself out there and talking to people, and realizing too that not everyone is going to strike a chord with you. You're not going to get along with every single person you ever talk to. So it may take talking to hundreds, maybe even thousands of people, but eventually you should, hopefully, if you keep doing it, find people that you jive with, that you get along with, that you can, become really good friends with. And you just have to keep going and not give up. It's almost like dating, right? And finding a partner to have a relationship with. It's the same thing with friends. You have to just keep putting yourself out there, and hopefully you come across the right people. Okay. Let's keep going. Okay. Could you explain the story behind the poem and song of Waltzing Matilda? So the basic idea here, this is that song, waltzing Matilda, you'll come a waltzing Matilda with me. That is all about a vagrant, right? A guy walking around with his swag on his back, right? Kind of like a swag is something that you would unroll on the ground and you can sleep in it. It can be like a one-person tent type kind of thing, or it could just be a rolled up blanket and pillow or something, but that's your swag. And originally it's about, I think he's a criminal, and he's stolen sheep, and he's running from the authorities in the song, and then he ends up drowning himself in a billabong, right? That's the song. It's pretty it's pretty sad. But that's the song. And so Waltzing Matilda is a metaphor for someone walking around with their swag, right? And the metaphor is that they're dancing with someone, they're doing the waltz, they're waltzing with someone called Matilda, and Matilda is an analogy for the swag. Right? So waltzing Matilda just means walking around with your swag. So that's where that comes from. We don't really use that kind of terminology anymore because people don't typically do that. Back in the day, in the probably 1800s, maybe even the early 1900s, you had people wandering around just looking for work. Probably around the time of the Great Depression, especially in regional areas of Australia, you would have had just typically men, walking around from farm to farm, business to business, saying, here are my skills. Can you guys pay me? Can you give me food? Can you give me somewhere to sleep if I do some work for you? Do you need something on the farm fixed? Can I help shear your sheep? Can I fix a fence? Can I dig a hole? And people would often pay them, whether or not it was with money, they would find a way to do it. So that is what the explanation there is. Let's do a couple more, and then we might finish up. Okay, this one comes from Anna. Do you do private English classes? So I'm thinking about starting up again and doing private English tutorials again with students over Zoom. So if you are interested, send me an email. You can contact me at pete@aussieenglish.com.au. You can send me an email. Just send me a message on Instagram as well. You can always message me there. And if you're interested in private classes, we can see what we can work out. But yeah, I've definitely kind of missed doing those over the last few years after having really young kids and kind of being strapped for time. But now with daycare and everything, I'm sort of back into a relatively consistent schedule and would be able to do it. And I really want to socialize. I miss hanging out with students and being able to help them with their English. So if you're interested in private lessons, just shoot me a message. The easiest thing is probably just chat to me on Instagram. If you're on there already, just send me a message and I'll get back to you probably that day if I can. But yeah, thank you, Anna. That was from Anna. Okay. This one comes from Zara Majlisi. Okay. I'm fine when speaking with foreign people, but with Australian people, I don't have confidence. Let me just have a drink. Starting to lose my voice, so forgive me for that. Okay. I think this is probably related to if you're talking to foreigners, and by foreigner, I imagine you mean people who don't speak English as a native language. Again, foreign is kind of a relative term to where you are. So that's what I imagine you mean. And I think a big reason there is probably because you're both kind of like learners, right? And I think the analogy I used was like when I was doing jiu-jitsu or when I'm learning guitar, I don't feel sort of intimidated or nervous when I'm doing jiu-jitsu with other learners, other beginners, or other people at my level. The same with guitar. Like if I'm playing guitar in front of someone who's also at my level or is also just, sort of intermediate learning guitar, I don't really think too much about it and I'm not that nervous or embarrassed or anything. But if I do it in front of someone who is incredibly skilled, right, like an expert, in jiu-jitsu, whenever I rolled with my coach, who was obviously a black belt, I think he's probably like 4 or 5 dans now. But when I was rolling with Tiago, I would always be terrified. One, because I wanted to do a really good job. And, you have that dream. You're like, oh, yeah, I'm totally going to submit him. But then, he's a black belt and you're not. So you get crushed and easily. And the other part to it was I don't want to embarrass myself and look stupid, because I want to show him that I'm really good. I want to make him proud. So you would get so much more in your head. And I think that happens a lot with people learning English. It's probably the same learning any kind of skill. If you do it with other people who are also learning, those people aren't really going to take that much notice of your mistakes. And they may not even hear or see your mistakes, right? You may be better than them or more advanced than them. And so they don't care. They're just happy to be there doing that thing with you. Whereas when you do it with an expert, quite often all the issues, all the mispronunciation, all of the grammar mistakes or vocab mistakes, the native speaker, in the case of, say, English, is going to hear and notice instantly. The thing, though, to know is that we don't care at the end of the day. Like, really, no one gives a shit. If they can understand what you mean, because that's the purpose of speaking a language. If you can communicate with someone and you can get your message across, that's what matters at the end of the day. You don't need to be perfect. No one's thinking, I understand everything this person just said, but they made this one grammatical error where they used the present perfect tense instead of the present tense. Oh my God, what an idiot. I'm not talking to this person anymore. I'm going home. No one is thinking like that, right? So a big part is just realizing that people just want to communicate when it comes to languages. The other part of this may be if you have trouble understanding the Australian accent, if that's part of it too, maybe you get nervous because when speaking with native speakers, they don't enunciate really clearly, right? They don't say all the different sounds. They use connected speech. They use slang. They use expressions a lot more than, say, learners of the language who are foreigners. If that's part of it, it just comes with exposure. You just have to do more of it. You got to listen to more Australians speaking English, consume more podcasts, TV shows, movies with as many different types of speakers as possible. So if it were me and I was having trouble, say, with Portuguese accents, because I'm learning, Portuguese, I speak Portuguese at home, but I have a lot of trouble with Portuguese. So the accents and the dialect of Portuguese from the country Portugal, not Brazil. I'm very used to most Brazilian kind of accents and slang, but when it comes to Portugal, I have next to no sort of exposure. So if it was me and I would be in your situation, right? If I was chatting to someone from Portugal, I'd probably be like, oh crap, I'm gonna feel like a beginner again. I'm not gonna understand what they're saying. They're gonna speak really quickly. They're gonna use other idioms and vocab that I don't know. And I'm just gonna embarrass myself. So I'm gonna get in my head and feel really nervous. If I wanted to prepare better or overcome that, I would probably go and try and find a lot of TV shows, podcasts, movies from Portugal, or at least with Portuguese speakers in that film, show, podcast with that accent, using that slang, that dialect, that pronunciation, everything like that, and just spend as much time with that content as possible. And it will probably only take a short period of time, right? Like weeks, maybe a month or two before you really kind of get used to it and feel comfortable and confident around that accent. And it's funny, even as a native speaker, you guys will probably know this too in your native languages. When you hear someone with a very strong accent, quite often, initially, you can't understand anything. You're kind of like if I hear, a good example is, say someone from India and they've got an incredibly strong accent. If I hear them speaking, my first thing will be like, oh, it's a different language. And then within a few seconds, of listening to the person, you'll be like, oh, okay, no, it's English with a very, very strong accent. But there are bits and pieces here that I can't understand. And then within a minute or two, you kind of start realizing the patterns of the person's speech. So the way that they're, say, not pronouncing a p with the aspiration, they're going more like b kind of sound, right? Like beeple instead of people. Your brain quickly adjusts to that. So I think it happens in all areas of languages when there's an accent that you're not necessarily very familiar with. You have to kind of adapt and get used to it, and you get better and better and quicker at being able to do that. So yeah, hopefully that helps. But I would just say keep going. Okay, let's see if we can do another one. Okay, this one comes from JWXNX. Please give me interview tips. So I imagine when you say that, because there's not much more context, you're talking about an interview for a job, or do you mean getting interviewed by someone for like a podcast, or interviewing someone for a podcast? Because obviously interview here could mean a lot of different things, but I'm going to assume you mean for a job. So I'm probably not the best person to ask because I've had very, very few interviews in my life. I need to get my wife on the podcast so that we can talk about it, as she would have prepared for and then gone to, I think, at least 3 interviews recently, maybe more than that. But she was spending a lot of time preparing. So, and I'll try and give you some tips off the top of my head. Firstly, it would be, with the job application you're doing, really try and learn about the job, the position, the company. What kind of thing do they want you to apply for job-wise? What's the history of the company? What are their values? All that sort of stuff. Dig in. Don't just do the bare minimum of answering the questions off the top of your head. Really try and research them before answering them. And then obviously there are actually podcasts. And I think there was an Australian podcast my wife was listening to about how to prepare for job interviews. And that was really good. She seemed to love that one. I will open up. Let's see if I can find it here. I'll have to ask her. She'll probably mention it when we do an episode on this. But I'll type it into Google here. Podcast, job interview preparation. Let's see if something here comes up. Prep. We'll type that in. Okay. So there's Candidate Club. That might be the one I think she was listening to. And then Job Interview Preparation Simplified. That's out there as well. But again, I will chat to her to talk more about it because she did so much sort of research and and just preparation for these different job interviews. But I would say, like with, say, going to do an English exam like IELTS, you really need to understand how the exam is carried out and then prepare for it. And it's the same sort of thing with job interviews. Don't go into it blind, not having prepared. Think about what the job position is. Have questions for the panel as well. Show your interest. But then look up the most common questions that get asked in a job interview and also try and prepare ahead of time your responses. And then I think beyond that, again, I know that they're not that specific. As I said, I'll try and get my wife on and we can chat about it. But beyond that, practice being able to spontaneously answer questions, right? So talking out loud by yourself in English, answering some, say, mock questions for an interview, try and do it spontaneously as opposed to, say, having cue cards where you're reading out specific answers and trying to memorize walls of text, because that is a way of getting yourself very nervous, right? I remember back at university when I was doing presentations, when we first started doing them at undergraduate in our science degrees, quite often people would get up in front of the class and they would have, you've got your slides on the screen that you want to show to talk about whatever the thing is that you're presenting. And quite often students would have written cards with the exact words that they wanted to say for every single slide. The problem is that often mistakes happen. Someone skips ahead. Maybe you miss a word or a line. And if you get caught out like that, you can quite often panic and totally freak out. So a huge thing is just getting good at being able to spontaneously speak in this case, right? And talk about these topics, answer these questions spontaneously. So that's a great way of improving your fluency and also obviously preparing yourself so that when someone just asks you a question, you don't have to think, okay, I've got 200 words in my head that I need to say from start to finish about this thing. You can more naturally and spontaneously answer those questions. So yeah, anyway, hopefully that helps. And I think we might finish up there for today, but I hope you're enjoying these episodes, guys. As always, please feel free to send me a message and let me know if you are enjoying these sorts of episodes. Definitely tell me if you don't like them, because I would love to, do something else if you guys would prefer that instead. I am here to serve. And then also, as a cheeky little request, can you please review the podcast on whatever podcast application you're using? That really helps. So if you're enjoying it, please, give it 5 out of 5 and write me a cheeky little note saying, "G'day, mate. This is, Jeff, and I love it." Anyway, thanks so much, guys. I appreciate you. I hope you enjoy the episode. I'm Pete, and I'll see you next time.